Thank you very much. I'd like to start off by giving a huge thanks to all my advisors, Professor McAlpine, who's here many more times today, but really one of the best advisors I think anybody could have, and Professor Snyder, you've been a huge help, as well as Professor Friedenstone, who couldn't make it here today. Today I'm going to talk about YouTube, participation, and the hybrid economy. My goal is to create a deeper understanding of the ways that websites like YouTube embody participatory values. To start off, how many people here have ever uploaded a video to YouTube? Okay. And why did you do it?
One was a class project, there's a couple of class projects, some were just for friends and fun.
Okay. So at any point did you feel like you were part of a community on YouTube?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, you did? Alright, well since February 2008, I've uploaded 7 videos to YouTube. I uploaded my videos not because I felt a sense of community, I did it because I felt like it, or I had to for class. And even though I was receiving a useful service, I didn't feel like I should have to pay for it. As you can see, my most popular video is a self-cleaning toilet. When I first heard about YouTube, it seemed inherently democratic, but something just didn't seem right about the relationship between corporations and users. So I thought about it harder. Is there anything wrong with a company profiting off of user-generated content? And then I came to realize that perhaps it wasn't a question of what, if anything, was wrong, it was how, in the words of Soren Mork Peterson, could a website be participatory, exploitative, and create pleasure for its users at the same time? Because what I came to realize is that YouTube's platform is actually the coexistence of 2 types of economies, the commercial and sharing, which have existed mostly but not entirely in separation for thousands of years. Briefly, a commercial economy involves any transaction in which money or price is the central term of exchange. For example, you go to the grocery store, get your groceries, and the cashier your money. There's nothing odd about money being the central term of exchange. However, in the sharing economy, money is the one term which is not okay. Traditional transactions in this type of economy might involve letting your neighbor borrow your lawnmower or going on a date with your husband or wife. It would be odd that if at the end of your date, your husband or wife offered you $50 to sleep with you. As you can see, money introduced into the hybrid economy complicates things. However, there's also a distinction between thin and thick sharing economies. My use of YouTube would classify it as a thin sharing economy because my motivations for using it were primarily me-regarding. In a thick sharing economy, there has to be at least some desire to do something for a community. I think this exists on YouTube, but is not as emphasized as the functional aspect. Lessig's ideal example of a thick sharing economy is Wikipedia. Contributors add to it because they find joy in it or because they want to improve the community. So what is YouTube? Well, Lawrence Lessig, who I've used as a foundation in my work, classifies YouTube as a hybrid economy. A hybrid economy somehow balances the relationship between commercial and sharing economies. It may manifest itself as a commercial entity, such as YouTube, that leverages value from a sharing economy, or it could be a commercial entity. No, it could be a sharing entity that utilizes a commercial entity supported sharing names, such as Linux. In this sense, the relationship between commercial and sharing economies benefit and add value to each. However, the link between the 2 economies is preserved only if the distinction between the 2 economies is maintained. Not only does Lessig explain how such an economy can exist, he even states that every interesting internet business will be a hybrid. So with this new information in hand, I wanted to know how are participatory values inherent of sharing economies embodied by websites in the hybrid economy. So I wanted to know how the relationships between corporations and users affected the participatory value of such a medium. In order to answer these questions, I utilized insights from the field of media and communication studies and the field of business. My methodology combined a historical analysis as well as an analysis of concepts and theories from both fields. Within the field of media and communication studies, I could have chosen hundreds upon hundreds of concepts or theories to explain the uniqueness of YouTube. However, my goal is to critique that YouTube is inherently participatory or democratic. I found that most criticisms of the mass media highlight the hegemonic power that mass media hold over its audience. In the classical political sense, hegemony describes a relationship in which a dominant class exercises control over society more through the consent of the public than the force of the dominant class. However, we can simplify or redefine hegemony to describe a relationship between two entities that involves a dominant group and a consenting subordinate group. By doing this, it becomes easier to see the practice of hegemony in other contexts. Media companies can exercise hegemony over its audience by selecting, censoring, or even altering the content of the information. Therefore, in this sense, hegemony can be an unintended consequence of presenting an event, or it can be constructed to support an agenda, as in the case of propaganda. We often take YouTube's control for granted because it does not at all resemble older mass media. However, the same processes of selection and censorship occur. On YouTube, the content is generally not altered, but code can be implemented to control which videos show up for certain searches. Censorship occurs when users flag content which they deem inappropriate. The popular is emphasized because it is more profitable, and the work of determining what content is popular and appropriate is outsourced to algorithms and user input. From the field of business, I sought to understand how businesses operating in the hybrid economy were influenced by participatory ideals and external forces. What I learned was that modern businesses are best understood as systems operating in a broad external environment. The theory that best reflects this viewpoint is stakeholder theory. It realizes that a good company strategy should manage and integrate the relationships and interests of shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers, and other groups in a way that ensures the long-term success of the firm. Because massive hybrids like YouTube influence and are affected by so many different stakeholders, balancing these relationships can be a tough task. Therefore, these companies should base their operations off a set of core values or principles. Now, in order to integrate the insights that I found from both fields, I extended the concept of hegemony, which sees only two entities, into the field of business, which sees a broad range of entities. While it is easy to see how a website like YouTube exercises hegemony over its users, it is difficult to see how all the other stakeholders come into play. However, if we reduce all the stakeholders into one entity, it becomes clear that the external environment exercises hegemony over YouTube. In conclusion, what I learned is that when attempting to understand how participatory values are embodied by a website like YouTube, it is too simple to only examine the relationship between corporation and user. While users influence the shape of YouTube, YouTube still discreetly uses hegemony over its users. However, hegemony can be extended to the relationships beyond the user to include competition and legal entities. All of these entities directly and indirectly influence the participatory value of YouTube. Therefore, while many of these websites cannot exist without a corporation, full and equal participation cannot be achieved. Thank you.
I don't know if somebody's probably already brought this up, and I hate to bring up his name, but how did the Rebecca Black explosion affect your project?
Well, I tried to just ignore that. I kind of saw the same thing when I was looking at some of the most popular videos in YouTube. I think 8 out of the top 10 are actually all professionally produced music videos. but 2 of those are actually Justin Bieber, who got his fame from YouTube. But to not complicate my project further, I just tried to ignore all of them. Any more questions?
I thought the presentation was great. I'm wondering, this shareholder sort of entity is one way of looking at the sort of corporate response to YouTube. I'm wondering about the other aspect in terms of intellectual property rights, those types of concerns, because so much of the content on YouTube.
Yeah, it's when I use the term stakeholder, stakeholders are any entity that can influence or be affected by the actions of a firm. So stakeholder is not simply a shareholder. It can be, a legal entity. It can be a competitor, or it can be the user.
So their right response might be to try to sort of stifle what's going on YouTube.
Exactly. That's why my conclusion is essentially that the external environment holds hegemony over YouTube, because the view of the stakeholder approach is that the business is somewhat a product of its environment, and it has to operate based on changes in the environment.
Okay, so what is your thoughts about that in terms of like the intellectual property right then violations on YouTube? How have corporations sort of handled that, and then maybe even bring it back to Lessig, and what would he sort of read into that kind of construction?
Okay, well, I definitely see the copyright issue as affecting the participatory value of a medium like YouTube. In our class, all the time we make videos, and we base it off of the academic fair use policy. But a lot of time, what we're doing is we're taking other videos and combining them to make a new video. Currently, a lot of times we don't have trouble with that, but some companies, Viacom among others, they're very affected, or they at least say they're Creative Commons.